My name is Bonian Golmohammadi from the World Federation of UN Associations. It's lovely to be in Prague. It's especially interesting for my organization to be in this building because over 70 years ago, when we were established, our first president, the first president of Bafuna, was the foreign minister who had this building as his workplace and home, Jan Masaryk. So it's a special occasion to be here and delight in this beautiful city. Friends, we have the 2030 agenda, which is seen in many ways as a triumph of the multilateral system. Never before have we seen a multilateral agenda with such a high degree of participation, even in the preparation. And the process towards the adoption was highly participatory, and its implementation should be no different. And today we have examples of both the universality of this agenda and the complementarity of the Sustainable Development Goals. And we're going to look at it today a little bit through the lens of participation of all. And just to remind us a little bit about the objective of this exercise today, the president of ECOSOC will hold an ECOSOC special meeting at the UN headquarters in May, and this preparatory meeting towards sustainable, resilient and inclusive societies through participation of all will provide input into that meeting. And so far we have listened to member state and UN representatives, and now it's time to listen to civil society perspectives. During the previous panels and statements, the question was, what is actually happening on the ground is of key importance. And here we have our panelists who represent exciting projects and activities that are actually happening on the ground. So we will have best practices from civil society organizations working in their own local contexts on the Sustainable Development Goals. We're going to try to make this also very interactive, so we hope that you will prepare questions and comments to their presentations. There is a common thread in these projects. You will see that they're on the surface maybe very different, but the common thread here and connecting these best practices is that they all advance specific SDGs through a participatory approach. And we have great examples here from Canada, from Tunisia, from Estonia. And they also reflect and show really the interlinkages between the Sustainable Development Goals. So while advancing a specific SDG, they also touch on other goals. And these efforts reflect the interconnectedness here, for instance, of urbanization, sexual health and reproductive rights, and e-governance, all looked at through the lens of participation. So we will first hear from all the panelists, and afterwards we will, as I said, have ample opportunity, hopefully, for interaction and questions. I'm not nervous of the time because we have a very time-disciplined crew here. So I trust that they will have presentations who also will give enough time for all of you to participate. Also, for the sake of time, I will not introduce them. They're all highly competent and accomplished individuals and professionals. You have, I think, their brief bios in the program if you want to know more. So I will just introduce our first panelist, which is Kai Klandorf, who's from Estonia and who's worked on the issue of e-governance in the context of Estonia, together with a coalition of civil society organizations. Kai, please.
Thank you. I'm very honored to be here today to share a bit of Estonia with you, and I'm very eager to learn from your experiences to take them back to my country and develop things even further. Because as we've heard today, we've done a lot, but there's still a long way ahead, and we have ambitious goals set for the next 12 years, and even further from there. But in greater detail, I represent the Estonian network of non-profit organizations, NENO, as we call ourselves. We are the largest umbrella organization composing institutionalized civil society organizations in Estonia. And I am proud to share how the government, different ministries, and the civil society organizations have had quite a good progress in cooperation and in partnership. One thing that we can be very proud of is that, according to OECD data, involvement in policymaking in Estonia has significantly increased. Estonia was ranked 6th in the last report. The one before that, we were ranked 33rd. So you might ask, what have we done to grant this sort of growth or grant this positive change? Especially considering that Estonia is quite small, with only 1.4 million people living there, this increasement has been significant for us. And today I will share 3 major steps that we have been taking in order to make and ensure responsive, inclusive, and participatory decision-making process at all levels, so inclusion for all to be available for. So the first step that Estonia has been taking is involving people in the lawmaking process. Estonia is sort of small but famous for its e-solutions, and that is something that we are very sort of proud of as well. And one of this is e-consultation system. It's a working environment for ministerial coordination of documents, submission of documents to the government and parliament. But what is important, especially for the civil society organizations, is that it also allows consultation. The e-consultation system gives everyone, every single person, a chance to follow the proceedings of draft legislation. We can participate in public consultations, submit comments to documents and that are in coordination and consultation process. Thanks to a good cooperation and relentless work of Estonian people, we have an opportunity to be included in the decision-making process. The system has created an opportunity for all to be heard, regardless of your age, your sex, your background, your education, your history. Regardless of who you are, you can submit comments, you can guide the work of the parliament, you can guide the work of the government. And the responsible party, regardless of who the ministry or who it is that is responsible for that legislation, is obliged to respond to that comment. And these are all in their permanent records. The challenge with the system, however, is that it's still fairly unknown to the general public. And considering that it's a legislation proceedings, it's still fairly hard for everyday people to access and get accustomed to and use it as it allows us to. The good news, however, is that Estonian Government Office will be working on bettering both these challenges, and overcoming these will probably be one of Estonian activities in the Open Government Partnership Action Plan. OGP, I think, is another abbreviation well known to majority here. Network of Estonian non-profit organization is the leading partner for the Government Office, because one thing that has been luckily sort of made clear to the Government Office of Estonia is that things work better when you do it in partnership. So the Government Office, with close relations to several civil society organizations, is trying to better the e-consultation system so that it would be better known and easier to use for everyday people. The second step that Estonians can be very proud of is allowing people to initiate collective initiatives. The Estonian Cooperation Assembly another civil society organization, has set up a citizen initiative portal. It's called Rahvaalgatus. It makes it possible to compose and send collective initiatives to the Estonian parliament. According to the law, the parliament will have to process appeals that have at least 1,000 signatures. Might seem very few to some, but again, with the 1.4 million of population, that is even challenging at some cases. By the end of 2017, which is about 2 years into the establishment of the portal, 16 initiatives had made it to the parliament, and the number is steadily increasing. In the spring of 2016, the Rahvaalgatus portal was mentioned as an important milestone in the Estonian e-democracy story. In the government, the e-governance in practice is something that they praise or put high value on. And e-governance academy, which is a civil society organization that is sort of sharing our experience with e-governance, is using Rahvaalgatus as an opportunity to share with other countries, which is a very easy portal to use and to allow people to actually initiate collective initiatives. However, the continuous challenge with the portal is that it's still owned by the same civil society organization, the Estonian Cooperation Assembly. And it is hard to communicate at some levels. When the initiative has been passed on to the parliament, then the work is not done. You need to monitor, you need to continuously communicate between the stakeholders and the parliament and the committees in the parliament. What is challenging in the case of Estonia is that the members of the parliament committees are still fairly, the process is still fairly new for all of them, and the knowledge of the collective initiatives is still fairly low. So we have our milestone, but we still need to continue working towards actually using it so that it would be regarded as an important part for the Parliament's everyday job. The third step that we are fairly proud of is implementing the participative budgeting process. To provide a sound basis for development, government budgets should be comprehensive, transparent, and realistic. Tartu, my hometown, was one of the first local municipalities in Estonia that opened its budget designing process to citizens. It began experimenting with participative budget in 2013. Citizens of Tartu were the first to be able to decide how their city should spend about 1% of the subsequent year's investment budget. People were allowed to submit whatever kind of ideas they had that were in later stages voted on, and the most popular ones were actually carried out. Throughout the implementation of civil society organization, again, e-Governance Academy consulted the municipality and continues to do so even now, 5 years into the process. Tartu has set 3 goals for the participative budget. It's first of all to improve understanding of the city budget, the second of all to boost cooperation between communities, because we see that the cooperation between parts of the city, different stakeholders, different civil society organizations is still vital if we want to see a budget that people are actually satisfied with. And the third is to find solutions to practical problems within the city. Because as it turns out, and luckily the municipality has learned it themselves, that they might not know everything that has to be done in their municipalities. The remaining challenge, however, is that even 5 years in, the city still needs help, and the speed of spreading the practice is fairly too slow. The system of participatory budgeting is spreading, but it should be by now in all municipalities in Estonia, and I hope to see that happening by the end of 2030. The remaining important part of all these 3 points or milestones that we have in Estonia is that we have a lot to be proud of. But at the same time, there is no reason to repose on our laurels. The work will go on, and I am sure the work will continue after 2030. And what I, as a representative of civil society organizations, I need to emphasize is that this work is in partnership. This work, all these three examples, would have not taken place if there wouldn't have been a partnership and well-coordinated cooperation between the government and the civil society organizations. Ministries and everyday people need to come together, work together in bettering the society, both in local level and global level. And I am very eager to learn how we can do that even better in Estonia. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Kai. Just a short follow-up question. I mean, you mentioned that there is a portal, and people can use this portal to comment on, for instance, legislation. Or how do you get people to know about it? Even how do you advocate the use of it? What are the challenges?
I think the advocacy is mainly done through the collective initiatives as they are. For example, currently the network of Estonian non-profit organizations, we are using the portal to stop pork barreling, if that makes sense. Basically, if politicians give civil society organizations money in order to buy them votes, but it actually might get something nicely done, but at the same time it's a political agenda, and we are trying to use the portal to stop that from taking place. And what we've seen now is that the best way to spread the word about the portal itself is to actually use it. For civil society organizations who have, from the first stages of 2015, when the development of the portal started, we've all used the portal to make way for the change that we want to see in our society. And spreading the word using that portal is the best way to actually advertise it as well.
Thank you. We'll come back with more questions for you. Our second panelist is Dr. Mitchell Kosny. And Mitchell, you're going to talk about a revitalization of Regent Park, which is a housing project in Toronto, and the participatory approach taken to implement this project. Mitchell, please.
Sure, thanks. I'm going to get right into it, and I'm kind of going to work at two levels. One is sort of the 35,000-foot context. Context is everything when you're talking to people who aren't completely familiar. And the other is I actually want to drop right down to about the 100-foot level and give you some very practical kinds of things that we did in terms of implementation. And I also want to kind of, I think, marry two of the Sustainable Development Goals really around sustainable cities and communities in terms of affordable housing as, I guess you could say, the product. And I want to marry that with the process, the participatory approach, and kind of put those together. And I come from the perspective, and reflecting on what we heard this morning, that all planning is local. All planning is local. So that's a starting point for me. The second starting point is it is about process and product. And I think we have a tendency to talk about process as wonderful. If process doesn't lead to product or outcome, it's not worth the paper it's written on. It's a bridge to nowhere. And I think we often fall very short and treat process as an event. Let's go and have some participation. That's wonderful. Well, what happens after? So this talk is about process en route to product that doesn't end. It's not an extra. Participation, engagement, it's a way of being. It's a way of operating. And the third kind of value, I guess I come at this from, is that I run marathons. Participation is like a marathon. The hard part is getting to the starting line. Running 42 kilometers is not hard. It's the 6 months that it takes to get ready to do it. And to me, that's what participation and engagement is. It's setup, it's organization, and then it's delivery. So that's kind of the values that I come at it from. Now, let me then set the context. As we said, I'm going to talk about a large revitalization project in the central area of Toronto. And I'm going to talk about it from the perspective of really the corporation that is responsible. It's called Toronto Community Housing Corporation. And I have the luxury in that I'm not an employee. I don't work. I never did work for the city or any government. I didn't work for the housing company. I'm a professor. I teach city planning. So I come at this from the luxurious position of having been chair of the board of directors as a volunteer. So that doesn't remove my bias or my personal investment, but I kind of look at it that way. So let me just again put then the corporation in context, because it matters. It matters whom you are in terms of, I think we often talk about participation is good, they should do it. Well, I think we heard this morning, they is us, and you better be prepared to walk the walk. Toronto Community Housing Corporation is the social housing provider in Toronto. It's the second largest housing company in North America. We have a portfolio of about $6 billion. We house 165,000 people. So it's a large corporation. It is an NGO, if you will, an arm's length corporation of the city. We joke and say sometimes that arm is very long, sometimes that arm feels very short. But we have an independent board of directors, and we are charged with developing, delivering, managing the social housing, what's another word, council housing, if you're some parts of Europe, public housing, etc. We're charged with kind of operating that portfolio. As I say, we house about 170,000 people. We got about a 12-year waiting list. So I say that because I think, on one hand, it's the luxury of speaking from an established organization, an established place, but the problems are still relative to what you're used to. My role, as I said, I was fortunate to be chair of the board of directors. And I want to digress for 1 minute and say, because I think it speaks to the larger context of engagement. I was not a political appointee. I was not a friend of the mayor or of the premier or the prime minister, of anyone. And I feel very proud to say that because I responded to an advertisement in the daily newspaper. It said, "Help run City Hall." And I applied. I was a professor. I taught urban planning. I do a lot of social planning. I applied. I went through a process, and I was appointed. I did that as a part-time sort of volunteer job. And I think that's important because, again, it kind of sets this context of merit, and you kind of don't own positions. You're there for a while, you participate, and you leave. So my role was to chair a 13-member board of directors, many of whom were residents who lived in our social housing. That's the housing company. We are very much, again, about walking the walk. We have about 1,600 employees, and throughout the corporation, I want to say that we believed in, it's a phrase I learned doing some work in South Africa, you get power by giving it away. You give it away, you empower, you try to not own everything. So I think that's difficult, it's hard, it goes against a bit of your own nature. So the whole genesis, the whole sort of corporation was about, we sort of talk about a community management plan, which was developed not by the experts, it was developed by the community. We have about 6,000 or 7,000 people that helped develop our business plan. And I want to say, we haven't heard the word business that much this morning, but quite frankly, we are responsible for our own bottom line. So we're a social entrepreneur, but we're responsible for finding the money, the funding, with some assistance from government, not a lot, because they would like out. They would like out of this game. So we have, say, sort of an entrepreneurial role, a responsibility, and again, we manage about 165,000 people. So we're driven by a community management plan. As we just heard, we're also intrinsic to the corporation. Yes, we do participatory budgeting. Yes, we give away $1 million a year through a social investment fund to the residents who live across our portfolio to make decisions about what should happen in their community, and actually to make decisions not vertically, but across the portfolio. Those are part of the parcel of sort of what we're about. So I say walk the walk. It's not somebody else that does this. It's not nice to do. You have to believe in it, and it's a way of being. I think I learned that much more. I've been involved in lots of processes where you hire the expert, or you come in and it's mandated by government, and you deliver it, and then it's over, and you walk out, and thank you very much. I think it's a life experience. It's part of just what you do, part of your operating plan, if you will. So that's the housing company that kind of was responsible for this community. The community itself, it's called Regent Park. It's in Canada, I would say it was a poster child for the late Second World War urban renewal. Right? It doesn't matter what city I think you were in, urban renewal, and it was homogeneous. And I find myself in an odd situation, because when we kind of look at all of the things that went wrong in this community, when they built it, it won every design award that there was to win. They were not bad people that did this. They represented the best thinking of the day. Good heavens, if you're from the UK, Ebenezer Howard, the Garden City, take the streets out of communities, make them safe, the best thinking of the day. Well, ideas change. Values change. And what happened over the 50 years was a lot of deterioration, lack of maintenance, right? It's like deferred maintenance in your home. While taking the streets out was a wonderful idea, it also made it difficult to kind of get in and penetrate and drive. It wasn't normal. I liken it to what, in my field, we call a gated community. Except it wasn't a gated community by how nice it is. There was a moat around the community, so it was gated by all of the things that weren't there. So there were about 7,500, 8,000 people. Most people in the community had lived in Toronto for less than 10 years. The average income was 15,000 Canadian dollars. Now again, I say that because it's relative to Canadian standards, and you have to kind of put that in perspective. So what the Toronto Community Housing Corporation said was, and this was in the early 2000s, we need to revitalize, and that's the word the community chose. Not regenerate, not renew, revitalize this community. Now also again, context. This is one community. This is 7,500 people out of 165,000 people. So throughout this whole effort, how did we ensure that the tail doesn't wag the dog? Everybody kind of wanted to be part of it. And we had failures. We talked earlier, I think this morning, about trust. How do you build trust? We had spectacular failures in trying to jumpstart this process. So the corporation came in, new mandate, driven by the community, and as I say, belief throughout the corporate structure that we're going to start a process of renewal. And I want to say it's the first time I had heard this phrase in sort of this role. We were viewed as head office. That doesn't have a good connotation. We were head office. We were going to come into this nice community and help out. Wrong. The impetus came from the community. But what we did, we actually facilitated. I want to talk a little bit about leadership at the end. We facilitated through process. So we did things like everything we did in that community. We hired community animators, and we gave them charge of not just the process, the delivery, the design, the implementation. Something we did. We work in 8 languages in the community. As a matter of course, our participation involved very different formats. The Spanish community liked to meet around the kitchen table. The Bengali woman, we had to work with them to set up a different kind. So we worked door to door, household by household, to design and to give power and control and money to support, to finance the whole community animation process within the community. We had about 5 or 6 other kind of ways that we encouraged and say this is where I want to be fairly detailed, this participation. So we supported in every way the locally driven initiative. Secondly, it was all about, when I said sort of this working in multi-languages, communication and communication and communication again. It was reinforcing. I think you're only as good as what you did yesterday. So that everything we did, we started from where we left off the next day. So it was a process of building. And that's good politics. You build support, you build on, and you get a cumulative buy-in at the end. One of my jobs as chair of the board, a bit of pleasure, depending how you look at it, my job was basically to wander around City Hall and build political support, to build financial support, and to really bring in government representatives, leading urban thinkers in the community, and really galvanize a groundswell of support. And as I say, this had a 50-year history of the poster child for everything that was wrong. If I said the word Regent Park in Toronto to you 15 years ago, you would have said bad, drugs, problems, everything. Okay? So my job was to say, how do you start to swing that agenda around? We convinced the city of Toronto, the government, to develop a social development plan. It's the first one they'd ever done. We all think of land use plans. This social development plan for the community was about building in inclusion, building in a social strategy. Because what we were committed to at the organization was, I remember standing when we knocked down the first building with the CEO, and we said, by the way, it was $1 billion project over 15 years. We're about 2/3 of the way through. And the CEO, we looked and we said, if all we do is build new housing, we will have failed. This will be an abject failure. It's a vehicle. It's leverage. So the social development plan that the city prepared talked with us about hiring locally. And I'm not just talking about McDonald's jobs. We weren't interested in that. We actually got young people, of which 40% of the population in Regent Park were under 16. We talked about that this morning. We heard this. So we started to bring young people to work with contractors and employers, union jobs such that when their job was over, they could have another job after this. So the whole social development strategy was leverage to raise income, to raise support, to do all of that. And the city came along sort of with us to do that. On organizations that we worked an awful lot with, I was very surprised, were all of the other human service agencies in the community who had built up a very paternalistic attitude over the years. I understand it, but great resistance to having head office come in and work. They came along slowly. We had to work with them. We chose to work with them. One of the biggest things we did, we redeveloped this community with the business community, the private sector. Not 60-40, 70-30, 50-50 with the development community who are committed to the same goals as we were. So what I learned was, yes, you can make money. Yes, there's profit here, but you can achieve social goals at the same time. So we gave up part of that control, because we own the site. We gave up part of the control over that site to bring in the private sector to work with us, and in the end we introduced some market housing and social housing. And what we then also did was look back at some of the original schemes, and of course, this is another talk, but we reconnected the streets back to the other parts of the city. We changed the design. We energized all of it, and again, so it was sort of around jobs, employment, development, equity, inclusion. And I will leave with a couple of comments here. When I said process has to lead to product, maybe 2 or 3 things that I would take away. And one I was quite surprised at. One of my other roles as a volunteer is I chaired a city committee which approves all development in the city. The development process in Toronto for many of us is slow. As part of redeveloping Regent Park, when we took this entire, it's a 69-acre site, when we took this site forward for final approval, there was not one objection. That's almost unheard of where I come from. Not one objection to anything we were doing in the entire renewal. I put that squarely on building process, on engaging community along the way so you build support. And that was 2 years. In our world, that's very fast for a project of this size. My final 2 points are this. We heard it once this morning, but secondly, I would say this is about leadership. It's not about the head of the corporation or the chair or whoever scores the most goals. This was about flat leadership where you gave power away and you facilitated flatline groups to enhance their capacity. And the final thing I would say, it actually seems quite maybe silly, but I learned, maybe the best thing I learned was something called, what I think we often do in participation and in all of our jobs, we use two words. Yes, but. What I learned was the fundamental change in the direction of everything is to change those two words to yes and. That's a fundamentally different direction for the discussions to take. We're 2/3 of the way through the process. You can check it all out on the website, online, etc. The poster child of disaster, and I will say this not because of me, I hear it enough as I walk around the community, I drive by it every day. It's now the poster child for probably the largest revitalization in Canadian history. The rest of the story has yet to be told, but that's where we are, and I'll stop now and we can follow up with questions.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mitchell. Our third and final panelist is Dr. Hedia Belhadj. Hedia, you will talk about a project that, if I understand correctly, started as an intervention to provide access to sexual and reproductive rights and then transitioned into a project sort of advancing gender equality and inclusion in many other facets. So please, Hedia.
Thank you very much. I would like to thank the organizers for identifying Tunisia to share our story. I represent the group Tawhida Ben Sheikh, which is a women's health research and action association in Tunisia. As many of you know, Tunisia is at crossroads of a cultural transition, and in the aftermath of the 2011 political change, we saw the rise of conservative attitudes and concomitantly the emergence of opportunities for democratization. The 2014 constitutions lays the ground for civil and individual rights, but obsolete laws and practices are still in effect. So today I'm going to share with you a story of how we moved from a community small project initiative to consensus building at the national level. We started with a project that was aimed at knowledge sharing and capacity building for women to demand sexual and reproductive rights and health services, including family planning, abortion, and cancer prevention from public health centers. The model follows a Women Speak Out scheme, which means women were selected from underserved suburban areas, and they were often unemployed and with low literacy levels. So they were the group sessions moderated by resource persons, and women were invited to speak freely. At the beginning, we started with, as I said, themes focusing on sexual and reproductive rights. But as Deputy Secretary General said, I have never seen as much community intelligence out of these group sessions. Women started little by little asking for more themes that include gender-based violence, communication within the family, children education, property rights, citizenship, entrepreneurship. So as we moved to new themes, we had to bring to our support to help out new civil society organizations that had the expertise to address women's new needs. So this process led to two things. Number one is the strengthening of these women in terms of capacity to identify new human rights barriers, to identify the help needed, and also, of course, on our area, to go and demand reproductive health services from the local centers. Moving forward, we identified two opportunities in the country. One is the societal dialogue on health, which is a process, a multi-stakeholder process involving community members, Ministry of Health, local NGOs, professional societies, and that was aimed at developing an accountability mechanism for health delivery through community and users' inclusion in health facility program delivery oversight. The second is the process of preparation towards the submission of Tunisia National Report for the Universal Periodic Review at the Human Rights Council. Therefore, the partnership that was initiated with the women's groups allowed a joint engagement in both platforms, providing the pathway towards a stronger engagement in policy dialogue. Most importantly, and I think this is a significant result, civil society organized itself into coalitions and for the first time spoke in one voice. We used to, each of us, speak for our specific area and mission. The coalition also opened out to international NGOs such as Amnesty International, Oxfam, International Federation for Human Rights, etc. So this led to a CSO shadow report that was really taken as a backbone for the questions that the Committee on Human Rights had submitted to the government of Tunisia. At the same time, the engagement with the ministry in charge of human rights led to the willingness of government to include already in the national report some of the issues that the civil society organization had identified. So we were running two processes. So coalition building, alliances, CSO's shadow report, engagement of CSOs with ministry in charge of human rights, with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Missions in Geneva, constituted a strong advocacy platform. In 2017, the national UPR was submitted, but at the same time, because of the pressure and the coalition building and the work of civil society organizations, among others, working with Parliament, significant law amendments were reached in Tunisia. The approval by Parliament of a comprehensive law on violence against women, the amendment of Penal Code Article 227 bis, which allowed to drop the charges against a perpetrator of sexual assault of a minor if the victim marries the offender. And 3, the cancellation of a circular that made it illegal for Tunisian women to marry non-Muslim men. These results recorded as the starters of an alignment between laws, national laws, and the 2014 Constitution. We were also invited in the process of SDG domestication. So just looking back, what are the elements of success? In this model, an initiative of community capacity strengthening on health led to an enhanced resilience and ability of community members to demand the exercise of the rights. Second, the snowball effect of partnership building, both on government and CSO fronts, allowed to move to new levels of consensus building to speak out on human rights issues and led to changes in the law. And 3, we show interlinkages of the SDGs, because originally we started with SDG 3 target to ensure universal access to sexual reproductive health services. And smoothly we moved to SDG 5 to achieve gender equality, empower women to make decisions about their lives. And of course, community participation and CSO organized advocacy during the societal dialogue and UPR shadow report writing and Geneva negotiations were contribution towards SDG 16 for effective, accountable, transparent institutions and responsive, inclusive, participatory and representative decision-making at all levels. But it's not only that. Our study case shows that other SDGs were partially addressed. One, poverty, because women chose entrepreneurship. 4, quality education. 10, justice and equality. And 17, partnership, capacity building, and resource mobilization, showing the interlinkages between the SDGs. So this is the short story, but I'm looking forward to your questions.
Thank you so much, Hedia. I mean, in your presentation, it sounded very smooth. Everything you presented was moving forward in a very consistent and effective manner, but there were many challenges, as you mentioned. I mean, both.
There were.
Give us a couple of examples of the challenges. You mentioned in the beginning that, you know, it was conservative values. You mentioned the shadow report. It sounded as if the government was listening to you, but what were the biggest challenges along the way?
In terms of relationship with the community members, it was very smooth. Actually, as I said, I have never seen as much intelligence coming from a group of women and also supporting the dynamics of supporting each other that led to significant behavioral changes. We don't have time to talk about these, but these are recorded. The challenges were that Ministry for in charge of civil society organization and human rights issues didn't feel useful to involve civil society organizations. So we made a lot of noise. The Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights was extremely helpful. The United Nations Population Fund were extremely helpful to help us get involved with this process, which later on the ministry recognized as very useful to them. So what we are saying is, later on in the question and the debate, I will speak about outstanding issues and how to, so the fight is on. Activism, we use our civil society organizations in Tunisia right now. We are determined. All means, marches, media, pressure in Geneva, in New York, all international UN processes are good for us to make a point.
Thank you. So I would like to open up to questions and comments from the floor. Just noting one thing, we discussed a little bit the content of the projects before we came here, and it was interesting to me that this is now under the umbrella of the Sustainable Development Goals, but at least 2 of the projects here, I think Kai's and Mitchell's, the SDGs weren't really a factor in the discussion. Almost nothing, right? And I mean, so whereas in Hedia's, you had much more discussion about the Sustainable Development Goals and the interlinkages. And I think it's interesting to note that the Sustainable Development Goals, I mean, the point is not to reinvent the wheel. There are many organizations and governments who are doing things that are already included in the Sustainable Development Goals. The question is, and this is for you to reflect upon while we open up, how can the SDGs be helpful in a project or an activity that is already ongoing and maybe even successful? What's the point of the SDGs? How can it be helpful? Now I'd like to open up to see any questions and comments. Please. Yes, please, sir. And if you introduce yourselves as well, because not can see you. I don't know if the microphone works.
Okay, I will speak loudly. My name is Hedia, I represent the United Nations Environment Program, and I highly appreciate the Estonian It's a very good example, and I think many people are following this. I want to share with you shortly also how UNEP, for example, United Nations Environment Programme, we have also the e-portal that is allowing the major group and stakeholders, not only the government, who are sometimes the masters of decision making, but also providing the platform for major group and stakeholders portals when they can contribute to the discussion among the governments concerning the preparation of the strategic documents, including, for example, the partnership policy, but also concerning adoption of resolution by the supreme governing body of United Nations Environment Programme, United Nations Environment Assembly. I think the same also is applied in some extent also with the ECOSOC of United Nations General Assembly. And we should say we have a very positive experience from it. For example, during the last United Nations Environment Assembly, the third session of the last December, we have the main theme towards pollution-free planet, when we also wanted not only to have the comments on document resolutions that should result in a reduction of pollution, but also to have the commitments from the government, from the communities, but also from the individuals, citizens of the planet. And we started through this e-communication, even e-commitments, we can call it also, this campaign, Beat Pollution. And we were really positively surprised. We had almost 4 million commitments from 4 million people. It was really rather impressive. And also we have the same campaign, for example, Wild for Life. It means prevention, reduction, and fighting against illegal trade in wildlife products, from the skins, from the rhinos, and all these things. It is very positive. And we have, for example, also, if I can react to you from Tunisia and also from Canada, we have also very close interaction with the private sector and public sector through all these major groups when we are, for example, working on the initiative of sustainable or environmental friendly financing in the banking sector, for example. And what is also sensitive, to have a contact with also extractive industries, because they are also one of the main challenges now for the sustainable use of natural resources. And also concerning the human rights, when we were working together with partners, including the human rights rapporteur, for example, the issues human rights and climate change, human rights and biodiversity, or human rights and health and environment. These are and this really communication and active participation, and also to give them the feelings that they are the equal partners, not only something additional to the main players' governments, but they are also equal in this.
Thank you so much.
If I can just a quick addition. I think sort of a word that in everything you say and what we've set up here. One of the words, say whether you talk private sector, community participation. We heard it, I think, this morning, but it was a simple word called trust. And trust is earned. It's not given. It's not assigned. And I will say in all of the work we did, the mistrust of you've tried it before, you failed last time, here you come again, and it's you and them, it's we and us. It's always sort of two polar sides, and that trust. I think the first thing I said was walking the walk. You had to earn the trust every single day that you did it, and it had to be better. Now I say that I think then isn't something you add on. It becomes intrinsic to sort of the way you operate on a daily basis. And I say it can disappear as much quicker than it takes to build. So again, in all of those sectors, for what we did, it was overcoming 40 years of mistrust to turn that corner. And you don't just say, trust us. So you build it, you earn it, and you earn it by showing results. And then you start to build that broader collectivity of moving forward.
Mr. Moderator, can I react to
Sure.
the question that was asked earlier about what will encourage participation of young people. In my country, young people were at the source of the change in government, in 2011. However, because of lack of trust, but also that political parties that were emerging didn't speak their language. So there is trust and also the language. We had the lowest participation in the legislative elections from the cohort 29 and below compared to other inhabitants. So there are, walk the talk is one, the trust, but also what is it in there, speak our language. Again, we are here as an elite that understand what are the SDGs and how the goals and targets are framed after hours of white nights. But the citizen, the layperson, particularly the young people, they don't see things for them. And I think this is what we have to change.
Thank you. More questions or comments from the floor?
There's one hand.
Yes, please, sir.
Thank you. My name is Moses Akol. I'm from South Sudan, and I first of all want to thank the Czech Republic for hosting this important ECOSOC preparatory conference. We are, as all of us know, going through some political turbulence in South Sudan. We've been having civil war for the last 5 years, and in this respect, I really appreciate what Colombia has done so far. This could be a template for countries like myself, for my country, where 50 years of violence has really retarded democracy and good governance. My little bit of intervention is about what Dr. Belhadj mentioned about empowering women. Luckily enough, in South Sudan, the only area that we can claim a little bit of success so far in moving towards the goals of 2030 is the area of women empowerment and child girl education. This is not to say that we are bragging about it, but comparatively, this is one area that we can say we at least have the confidence that will meet some of the goals of 2030 SDGs. But empowering women itself and women resilience, I think, is only half of the picture, because poverty elevation also requires the participation of women. Dr. Belhadj, you talk about the situation in Tunisia, which is admirable. The situation in my country is more dire, where there's a civil conflict going on, there's a high level of illiteracy. So isn't there sort of a threshold, or maybe just a breaking point for that resilience? How can we continue empowering these women without losing their enthusiasm so far, especially when there's little help coming from either the international organizations or from the government itself? So thank you.
Thank you very much. Maybe a couple of more questions and then comments from the panels. Don't be shy. Yes, please.
Thank you. Good morning. My name is Petra Sikorova. I am the Czech United Nations Youth Delegate, and I would have a question concerning the interesting projects in Estonia. I would like to ask if you have any statistical data regarding which social groups are mostly benefiting from the projects you mentioned, and if there are any. Are there young people, are there young women or women in general, people with disabilities? And also, do you have any information which of these groups are participating in the projects the most? Thank you.
Thank you. You want to go?
Thank you for the question. I don't necessarily have official statistics, But considering, for example, the third example of the participatory budget, then at least among some of the results and among some of the activities that the municipalities have actually implemented, one of the examples was how to make wheelchair movement in a city to be more smoother, to be more accessible. Because if you look even here in Prague, if you imagine people in wheelchairs going from one place to another, then the roads are not very access friendly. This is something that Tartu was at least working on, and that was, I don't think necessarily the result of either sort of including civil society organizations who work in that realm specifically, but I think it's more thanks to people actually seeing the problem, actually people being able to think about people with disabilities more and including them in every decision and seeing how every decision impacts youth and impacts people with disabilities. So not specifically targeting organizations who work in that realm, but all the decisions have to be made in taking consideration of other groups in the society as well. Because as we heard today, there's no us versus them. There shouldn't be, at least. And if there still is, then that has to change. So all the decisions that need to be made, and have been at least to some extent, include all the groups in the society. But
yeah, I was going to follow up. I'm sort of struck by sort of that, and I think what we've all said, and I look back at us and I reflect on my own experience, and I think the first comment you said was, imagine some things happened without SDG. It's probably heresy to say in this room, but yes, things did happen, and things will continue to happen. And sort of two things I would say. Notwithstanding, I think that it's important to write things down. I think it's important to write things down. So when you look at the directions in SDG, I mean, it's important to have that framework written, adopted, out there as a measure. So yes, things will happen with or without it, but that provides a common sort of a yardstick, a set of measures. So for me, I don't underestimate that at all. I would be first to say, yes, what we did we didn't look at any of the strategic goals. We didn't do that. We did what we did, and we enhanced it, and we built capacity. But I also say that safety net, and I mean that, again, from my context of having the goals, the approaches, the policies, the principles written down is important. So, and we do that in a lot of our policies at all levels. And the other, which I feel almost sort of an admission, as we talk about, as I talk about my experiences, I realize full well I am a white, male, university educated from Canada in a very well-off country, in a very well-off society, with a job that I've always had and a good future and a retirement. I don't treat that lightly, but I know it's there. And what I find I had to learn, I will learn this for the rest of my life, is we're not the white knight charging in, helping out. And that's why for me it was learning, as a Canadian I will say, learning when to shut up, learning when to be quiet, and learning when to facilitate the discussion and let it happen. That's why for me when I ended on leadership, it's not about being the chief. It's about being able to facilitate horizontally and in fact build capacity so that next time they don't need us, whoever the they is. You've left the capacity. And that to me is do you teach people how to fish, or do you give them fish? So all of our approach is about extending that capacity, leaving the skills, so in fact you exit stage left, and that's what you leave behind. in terms of that.
Thank you.
Please allow me to answer the question of the delegate from South Sudan. Congratulations on the achievement in terms of gender equality on SDG 5. Can I share with you a couple of stories that I read having served in the United Nations organization, UNFPA, UNAIDS? I recall of good practices when women were given food aid distribution responsibilities by UNHCR, by UNICEF. What I read, it was perhaps the best run project of aid distribution. I recall also a few other examples of excellent results in peace building, where women from different communities. In Bosnia-Herzegovina, in the mid-90s, I worked there. We had women speak from Serbian and Bosnian origins, speak about health themes, children education, normally, and it was a bridge for peace building. There are also excellent stories from Colombia, in Latin America, from African countries, etc. So the motto is trust women. Doesn't matter they are literate, they are not literate. They have the intuition and the capacity to run well. And in terms of governance, this is the best, in my opinion, it's the best input for the women themselves, but also for the communities. In terms of the SDGs, let's be honest. A civil society organization in Tunisia, this is a platform. The UN officers there are speaking about it. They are pushing my government to come up with a plan. Of course, we do have indicators. So this is a platform. This is yet another opportunity for us to push on our issues. Like the UPR is an opportunity, the SDGs is an opportunity. Maybe there will be another one, we will take it. So I think from our perspective and community perspective, this is what it is. And we are very happy that it's there. Everybody is talking about it. But the one thing that is good about the SDGs is that it runs from human rights to the economy, to human lives, to health, to social issues. So it gives a broad platform where we can enter, but we are not underestimating anything that comes to the fore.
Thank you. And I mean, the Sustainable Development Goals, they're interconnected. It provides a platform. It is universal. And frankly as well then, it also generates funding. I mean, since this becomes the agenda of a lot of the development agenda and money, so I mean, this is also something that especially civil society organizations are considering when they talk about the Sustainable Development Goals. Kai and Mitchell, your platforms, organizations, what could have been improved or strengthened if it had been done within the context of the SDGs, if anything?
I think in the case of Estonia, if we were initially from the beginning considered this sort of global platform as a useful tool, I think it would have been easier to communicate it. I think, as you mentioned, funding. There are several international funding opportunities for civil society organizations to apply support from in order to better the situations in local municipalities and local communities. So we could have used the reputation. I think that's one thing that we're now doing in Estonia with looking at SDGs and looking at OGPs and different abbreviations and different platforms. Governments and ministries put high regard on reputation. International reputation among voters, and it's easier to get things done if that matters. So SDGs and implementing the action plans They create positive reputation. They create positive they create positive examples for ministries to use. And that creates an opportunity for civil society organizations to crack open the door and crawl their way in so that they would be up for discussion, up for cooperation. So I think these platforms can have very practical benefits as funding, but also sort of abstract sides as positive reputation opportunities that would allow us to be in discussion and cooperate more effectively.
The comment I'd make, and again, maybe I shouldn't say it, but I'm here. I'm actually not sure that we would have done anything differently with or without it. Having said that, in a similar way, I think platforms or forums, maybe as a Canadian, we always validate ourselves by looking at somebody else. We're not very good at defining ourselves, but we define ourselves by what we're not. I won't go further with that. But I think what this does is I would use words like validates. It reinforces at a very high level that you're not out there alone. You're not without any resonance in other parts of the world. So, but I would sort of say, rather than helping on the way in, I would say that it kind of sets that broader context for framing what you're doing. So maybe they're more parallel as opposed to and sort of mutually reinforcing.
Thank you. Comments, questions? I can see you have some words of wisdom from the World Bank, no?
Might be just words. So I have to raise my voice. I think your observation is very useful. I may not just take it by two excellent interventions, not referring to the SDGs, about to what extent the concept of universality is being endorsed at the country level or not. I'm familiar with the excellent work Estonia is doing based on the good applications that they have of science, technology, and the interconnectedness. And even if you say it or you don't, well, it's very much that could be translated as SDGs in action. The same about what's happening in the cities level. Canada is submitting for the first time at the HLPF in July, and perhaps when the country is going to be having its universal approach, the reference to the SDGs could be more frequent. But I agree again with the professor that before and after the SDGs, there is some work that could really be useful to the cycle. It's all about how to share it, the scalability. The observation of the SDGs in Tunisia, because the history, it's the MDGs as the involvement of Tunisia in this regard. MDGs brought the NGOs and the civil society organizations into the scene. The SDGs is bringing two new players, the OECD advanced economies and the private sector. So I hope that this is going to be different going forward. I took lots of notes because the issue of localization based on such experience is very much rich. And we need to have a good approach on how to get the best of benefits, not for the benefits of the speakers because they know what they are doing, but basically for a development agency like us. We learn and we try to scale up and share the ideas as we did exactly with many of our projects in renewable energy, conditional cash transfers. All of these projects were not born in the World Bank, but were exposed to the ideas, had some twinning arrangements, and then they are becoming a kind of a global development piece. But excellent intervention. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
It's interesting, I would say, and just a quick follow-up, there's a question over here. Maybe when I said things would have happened with or without, I'm a long way from home, so I can get away with almost anything here. You know where, in hindsight, where we could have, where it would have, you know the only level of government who did not play? The federal government. Now, this was a previous government. It doesn't matter. It was a national government did not show up, did not play, was not there as an active role player. And I mean, there's sort of two responses there. I guess you say the good news is the bottom up, the community that's driven and owned, and that's what makes it happen. The frustrating thing was, where in heaven's name is your national government, which has national responsibility for national urban policies, which we have none? Where are they? So in a way, that external validation from SDGs could have helped drive the national support for something that actually bubbled up legitimately from the local level. It's almost a reverse assist.
Thank you, ma'am, please.
There is a question. Microphone. No microphone, so I'll try to speak louder. I'd like to actually associate myself with Mahmoud for the reason that I've also been a part of the World Bank and have been involved in a number of countries on different projects. I think this is a very important point, listening to all of you, that clearly the grassroots or country level efforts and initiatives in the private sector really offer unique models for us to really reflect on how they can be replicated and sustainable going forward. I think within the context of, and I represent the United Nations Regional Commission, Regional Economic Commission of the UN, and I deal with Asia Pacific at large right now. I must say that there are two major elements which are very important in trying to enhance the participation at the local level in a much more effective manner. And I'm drawing from some of the lessons that we are learning from this sub-region as a whole. And this predates, of course, Sustainable Development Goals, as has been talked about. But now the challenge will be on how to tailor and modify and scale them to be supportive of promoting Sustainable Development Goals. So the two important elements, one is the concept of participatory budgeting. And I think this single tool itself is a very powerful tool. I can share with you the experience of Korea, where Seoul government launched an initiative of enhancing and nurturing local government participatory budgeting. And it's a fascinating model. It's of course taken good 15, 20, 17 years to nurture this model. From Seoul now, it's been spread across Korea. And it's really a very interesting model because, of course, Korea is a very IT-driven economy and very much anchored on science, technology, and innovation and community involvement. Very impressive in terms of the culture that it brings. And I think looking at that and talking to the mayor of Seoul personally for a number of hours at different visits, it's very impressive the commitments the mayors have to lift their cities and the local governments underlying them. And the biggest tool there has been combination of ICT and participatory budgeting, which I think have to be prerequisite for localization of the sustainable development. A second is the process of devolution that has happened in a number of countries. And Indonesia went through a massive devolution. And clearly the participation of the public in the whole process, not only just the devolution, but to make sure that they are also involved in participatory budgeting and participatory planning, not just budgeting itself, and allowing and empowering the local population and the local civil servants and training them to be able to go further with the replication and sustainability. Now, drawing from what has already happened, I mean, if you look at even countries like Bangladesh, Bangladesh is going for digitization program of a massive scale. On the other hand, we have Singapore, which has done it all in a number of ways. But all these so far have not been informed or nurturing what I would call sustainable development agenda. So I'd like to advocate that we should be talking more at local level on how to use the existing frameworks, models, policies, regulations. And this involves a lot of hard work. For instance, for local budgeting, you have to definitely amend the local government ordinances, and you have to make sure everybody is trained. So not to simplify this task, there's a lot of work to be done, but I think these solutions that I'm talking about are the solutions which will help us institutionalize, scale, and ensure the sustainability of local government participation. I'll stop here.
Thank you very much. I forgot someone who had asked for the... several here. Yes, please, ma'am. No. I think if we pass the handheld here, it's coming.
Good afternoon, and I would like to start by thanking the Czech Republic for hosting and express my deep appreciation for the excellent presentation by the panelists, starting with the e-portal, going to housing, to human rights, which led me to ask my questions. Coming from Lebanon, we are facing several situations, and we are not discussing the value of the SDGs or not SDGs. What we are interested in is how to multiply and replicate your respective experiences from local to local. And then it will bubble up from local to global, and then the validation starts. And I will stop here. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I have an observation myself regarding the discussion about the point of the SDGs. I think we don't have time, obviously, to delve into it now, but some of the things that we have seen is that some of the SDGs, or all of the SDGs, obviously are interlinked with others, and using the Sustainable Development Goals as a tool to bring in different tribes, different families who not necessarily in the past have been working together. David is going to talk about that. That's a very important component, and we've seen that, for instance, in Goal 16, where peaceful, just, and inclusive societies, you have the whole peace-building community, the development community, have not necessarily been talking with each other effectively in the past, and they very much could reinforce each other's work as well. So I think that's one component, and I think David is going to, I'm sure, elaborate on that. The other thing is, what we see in our organization, we work a lot with youth, and that came up, and I see one thing is about youth engagement, but it's also to the larger topic that was discussed this morning about the weakening or the threat against the concept of multilateralism. And I think the SDGs can be a fantastic tool there, because what we are doing, for instance, we have some global citizenship education programs where they take the SDGs, global issues, they localize it to local community projects. But another component that I think that strengthens is not only the skills and the knowledge, but it's about the values. It's about the feeling of young people, about the importance, not about the actual issue that they're working on the ground, but the interconnectedness between other countries, other peoples, other ethnic groups. And I think that will strengthen multilateralism in the long run. It's not as easily measured as some of the indicators we have in the SDGs, but I think it's a key component as well if we look how to keep or strengthening multilateralism in the long run. We are coming to an end. Each panelist, you have some short words of wisdom. Hedia, why don't you start?
I Thank you for giving us the opportunity to speak sincerely about the SDGs. I think we have to continue, and most importantly, we have to translate that in a language that is understandable at the grassroots levels, because that's going to be the magic that will make it for communities to understand what their contributions, because so far the language is not really going that deep. Thank you.
Two things. One I've said, and I'll sort of repeat, but for me, this is about leadership. And again, a leadership which is about facilitating, giving power and ownership away, making sure process leads to product so that there is a measurable, definable outcome. And I guess the second point, at the end of the day, we look at each other, it's still about people. It's about people to people, and it's about individuals in every chair here doing something as simple yet as difficult as taking risk. Everything you've talked about, we've talked about today, and we'll hear this afternoon, at some point there's risk. And I would say all of us, you kind of got two choices. The sun will come up tomorrow, it'll probably be a nice day somewhere, and we'll carry on. I think we want to engage in shaping that tomorrow, and that involves taking the risk and simply bothering to try to make a difference. And I think that's what everybody here is about.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Thank you. First, I think I want to briefly react on the multiplying issue question that came up. I would be happy to discuss this further, for example, over lunch. But I think the multiplying issue is very closely related to what Mitchell was just saying. It's about taking action. When I look at the 3 milestones or 3 positive examples that we've established in Estonia, we didn't get it right with the first time. We tried and tried again, and 5 years in, we still try. So we're not going to have a perfect solution after one implementation of one project or one example. Multiplying something nationwide, countrywide, global-wise, it takes time. It takes several risks and several different actions. And it's about trying to find a solution most suited for your country and for your region. We have this global thread. Yes, I agree. It's an important opportunity and an important platform, but it varies in countries how we actually make the change happen. But in order to do so, we need to do it in cooperation between different institutions. We need to include civil society organizations. We need to listen to people, what they actually have got to say. And at the same time, I have to emphasize it for the civil society organizations as well, who might be watching us. It's not that we have to be included. It's also that the civil society organizations have to make themselves be included as well. We can't sit at home and wait for everything to happen. We have to make ourselves important enough so that the governments and the institutions cannot not include us. So I think the cooperation between different parties is something that I want to emphasize as a final point today.
Thank you so much. Well, the clock is ticking in many respects. We have lunch and we have the 2030 agenda. We need to move forward on both those things. And I think that what this has shown is really that the participatory nature, and I saw Ambassador Kamau was here earlier, in the actual adoption of the SDGs was much higher and much better than it has ever been before in these UN processes. This is not automatically continuing, as we have seen, both in terms of the national implementation, including all stakeholders in the work, so that needs to continue. And finally, the interconnectedness of the SDGs. As we have seen, I think if we work on one of the SDGs, we're moving all of them forward in one way. And if we collaborate on it, I think that the strength of that is going to be even better. So participation for all. I think that it takes all of us really to transform the world and make sure that we're leaving no one behind. Thank you, and help me thank the panelists so much. I have been given an important task as well, is to guide you to replenishment. It's the same way where the coffee was. It's in the same initial direction. You continue, walk down the corridor, and on the left, there shall be food waiting for you.